Israelis are growing impatient. Demonstrations again erupted across Israel against the government and in support of hostage release. Despite talks on a truce deal resuming in Egypt, over 30,000 Israelis hit the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturday night, demanding stronger moves from the Netanyahu government for return of the hostages. Public calls speak for fresh elections, with demonstrators chanting that the Netanyahu government had outlived its mandate. Continued captivity of hostages in Gaza has caused rising tensions, with some demonstrators accusing Netanyahu of purposefully seeking to prolong the war for its personal gains.
I think that ceasefire is adamant that the most important thing is to bring the hostages back and to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, and that's the most important thing, and ceasefire will serve that. Basically, the Israeli people are hostages to the right-wing government, and the people of Gaza are hostages to the Hamas, and basically there has to be a way to overcome that and to stop the fighting and the killing. Just for now, and to get everybody home.
On the diplomatic front, talks between Hamas and Israel resumed in the Egyptian capital with hopes of progress. CIA Chief William Burns is also present there, besides representatives from Egypt and Qatar. According to details released by Britain, the mediators were to hear the militant group's response to a proposal that would halt fighting for 40 days and exchange hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Despite Egyptian media reporting that some progress has been made, a senior Hamas official has insisted that the group will not agree under any circumstances for a truce until there is a complete end to the war, which also includes Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. The Hamas official has also accused the Israeli Prime Minister of trying to derail the proposed Gaza truce and hostage release deal with his continuous threats to keep fighting the militants. The official says that Netanyahu is personally hindering efforts to reach a truce deal for his personal gains. On the other hand, Israel, which is yet to send a delegation to Egypt, according to reports, an Israeli official has said that a delegation would only go if there was a positive movement on the proposed framework. Despite months of shuttle diplomacy, mediators have failed to broker a new truce, with major sticking points remaining, like Israel's insistence on launching a ground invasion into Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah, where millions of civilians have taken refuge, and Hamas's demand for a lasting ceasefire.
When you come closer to the goal, you feel.
And from on this, we're now being joined by Dov Zakheim, former Under-Secretary of Defense in George W. Bush administration, and he's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show, sir. I want to first start by asking you that there has been a recent flurry of activity to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. We've seen hostage talks take place in the past as well, but there's a sense of urgency this time around. I want to seek your assessment. How optimistic are you that there will be a ceasefire deal this time around?
Well, it's very hard to know. Thank you for having me, by the way. The problems are on both sides, as you described. On the one hand, Hamas is insisting that the war has to end and that the Israelis have to get out. That is very, very difficult for Israel to swallow. I suspect harder to swallow in terms of getting out completely than the war ending. After all said and done, Israel launched its attacks because the hostages were taken. And so if the hostages are released, it's hard for them to say, well, we're going to continue to fight. The trouble, of course, is that Netanyahu, and it may not be Netanyahu, it's reported as a senior Israeli. So a lot of people think it's Netanyahu himself. It might be one of his minions, somebody like Mr. Dermer, his strategic affairs minister, who's very close to him, has said unequivocally that regardless of whether the hostages are released, Israel will continue its operation into Rafah. Now that, I suspect, is why you're seeing so many Israelis demonstrating in such large numbers. This week, by the way, is Holocaust Memorial Week. Memorial Day, actually, will fall this week. And the motto of the Holocaust Memorial has always been never again. And a lot of Israelis are saying, well, if it's never again, why are we letting the hostages rot in Hamas hands? And oh, by the way, Hamas not long ago said it couldn't identify all the hostages. All of a sudden, it now says it can release them all. So there's a lot of doubt as to Hamas's credibility. There's a lot of concern about Netanyahu's attitude. His own fellow war cabinet minister, Benny Gantz, former chief of staff, former defense minister, has said that whoever made the statement about going into Rafah regardless should wait and see what exactly a deal might look like, which is an obvious criticism of Netanyahu and his people. So there's no agreement inside Israel. There's no agreement on the Hamas side how far they're willing to concede. And the negotiators who've been working tirelessly, and I include especially among them not just the Egyptians, but Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, who keeps going to Israel, to the Middle East rather, to negotiate a deal and hasn't come up with one. And he's probably the best negotiator America has. It just shows you the frustration that is holding things up for the time being. So will it happen? To answer your question directly, I just don't know. And I don't think anybody really does.
Right, Mr. Zakim, you've clearly laid down the sticking points. While Hamas says that they will not agree to a deal that does not end the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel is adamant, like you mentioned, on a Rafah invasion. In such a backdrop, in such a context, how do you see Washington placed at this point of time? Because we've heard that Hamas has also been seeking Washington's guarantee for a cessation of hostilities.
Well, what Washington has been saying is it has to be what they call sustainable. Now, does that mean a permanent ceasefire that goes on forever? Well, it's hard to say forever in the Middle East anyway. But clearly, Washington is getting frustrated. Biden is personally frustrated. And as I said, how often can we keep sending the head of our CIA, who has to deal with intelligence issues all around the world, to the Middle East to negotiate this thing? And so clearly Washington is going to add to the pressure on Israel. It has many vehicles to do so. I've spoken about that actually on this particular show in the past. But at the same time, as Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has said, Hamas is making it difficult. And so here, I think Washington's pressure would have to be on Arab allies, and particularly the Qataris, to push the Hamas people to make concessions on their own. So the pressure has to go both ways, but there's absolutely no doubt that the administration, and I think just about everybody in Washington, wants to see a ceasefire and the release of hostages.
Right, Mr. Right, sir. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on WION and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for having me.